J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan has brought a bit of magic into the lives of countless children and adults for over 100 years. So much so that it requires a little introduction from me. Yet our declamation tonight returns us to the story's earliest days using a passage from the charming 1911 novel that inspired many adaptations on stage and screen. Sophomore Charlotte Schofield takes us to the beginning of the story, where we find Mrs. Darling wondering about this mysterious young man, Peter, who has charmed his way into her children's imaginations. Please welcome Charlotte.
There never was a simpler, happier family until the coming of Peter Pan. Mrs. Darling first heard of Peter when she was tidying up her children's minds. It is the nightly custom of every good mother, after her children are asleep, to rummage in their minds and put things straight for next morning, repacking into their proper places the many articles that have wandered during the day. If you could keep awake, but of course you can't, you would see your own mother doing this, and you would find it very interesting to watch her. It's quite like tidying up drawers. You would see her on her knees, I'd expect, lingering humorously over some of your contents, wondering where on earth you had picked this thing up, making discoveries sweet and not so sweet, pressing this to her cheek as if it were as nice as a kitten, and hurriedly stowing that out of sight. When you wake in the morning, the naughtiness and evil passions with which you went to bed have been folded up small and placed at the bottom of your mind, and on top, beautifully aired, are spread out your prettier thoughts ready for you to put on. I don't know whether you've ever seen a map of a person's mind. Doctors sometimes draw maps of other parts of you, and your own map can become intensely interesting, but catch them trying to draw a map of a child's mind, which is not only confused, but keeps going round all the time. There are zigzag lines on it, just like your temperature on a card. And these are probably roads in the island, for the Neverland is always more or less an island, with astonishing splashes of color here and there, and coral reefs and rakish-looking crafts in the offing, and savages and lonely layers and gnomes who are mostly tailors, and caves through which a river runs, and princes with 6 elder brothers, and a hut fast going to decay, and one very small old lady with a hooked nose. It would be an easy map if that were all, but there is also the first day at school, religion, fathers, the needlework, the round pond, murders, hangings, verbs that take the dative, chocolate pudding day, getting into braces, say 99, 3 pence for pulling out your tooth yourself, and so on. And either these are all part of the island, or they are another map showing through. And it is all rather confusing, especially as nothing will stand still. Of course, the Neverlands vary a good deal. John's, for instance, had a lagoon with flamingos flying over it, at which John was shooting, while Michael, who was still very small, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it. John lived in a boat turned upside down on the sand. Michael in a wigwam. Wendy in a house of leaves deftly sewn together. John had no friends. Michael had friends at night. Wendy, a pet wolf forsaken by its parents. But on the whole, the Neverlands had a family resemblance. If they all stood still in a row, you could say of them that they had each other's noses and so forth. On these magic shores, children at play are forever beaching their coracles. We too have been there. We can still hear the sound of the surf, though we shall land there no more. Of all delectable islands, the Neverland is the snuggest and most compact, not large and sprawly, you know, with tedious distances between one adventure and another, but nicely cramped. When you play at it by day with chairs and tablecloths, it is not in the least alarming, but in the 2 minutes before you go to sleep, it becomes very real. That's why there are nightlights. Occasionally, in her travels through her children's minds, Mrs. Darling came across things she could not understand, and of these, quite the most perplexing was the word Peter. She knew of no Peter, and yet he was here and there in John and Michael's mind, while Wendy's began to be scrawled all over with him. The name stood out in bolder letters than any of the other words, and as Mrs. Darling gazed, she felt it had an oddly cocky appearance. Yes, he is rather cocky, Wendy admitted with regret. Her mother had been questioning her. But who is he, my pet? Why, he's Peter Pan, you know, Mother. At first, Mrs. Darling did not know, but after thinking back into her childhood, she just remembered a Peter Pan who was said to live with the fairies. There were odd stories about him, as that when children died, he went part of the way with them so that they should not be frightened. She had believed in him at the time, but now that she was married and full of sense, she quite doubted whether there was any such person. Besides, she said to Wendy, he'd be grown up by this time. Oh no, he isn't grown up, Wendy reassured her confidently, and he's just my size. She meant that he was her size in both mind and body. She didn't know how she knew. She just knew it.